are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth, all the financial side of life. So today I'm going to be talking about, I named the episode Wealth in Transition. And it's really the situation in which we find ourselves when how we view ourselves or want to view ourselves is not in alignment with our financial position. And it can cause, I think, quite a bit of conflict, and it can damage our ability to get success, or to get the kind of success that we want, as well as damaging relationships. And so this is a topic that it combines. Oops, my notes are suddenly going crazy here. So it combines the income and wealth building that I typically talk about on this show with some identity issues. So just referring to the three pillars of attainment, we have pursuits there in the green, and one of them is finances. It's actually in the, I'm trying to do this right, that's finances. But if you go above that, this is the self pillar, and at the top of the self pillar is our identity, our purpose, and our mission. And obviously everything in the pyramid is closely bound together, but perhaps more so than many other countries, in the United States, our identity tends to be closely tied to our work and or professional lives, and our status with respect to what we can or cannot afford. And that's not to say that everybody in the United States aspires to be a billionaire. I don't think that's the case at all. But I think most people in the United States aspire to be in the middle class, and what that affords for us and our families, and how we look at ourselves when we are part of it or not part of it, when we're in the upper versus middle versus lower middle class, all of that, I think, impacts us. Maybe we're not consciously aware of it, or at least not all the time, but I think nonetheless it does. So I have a number of points that I'm looking to cover, and hopefully this will resonate with you, and your particular situation. So first of all, I want to talk about just the psychology of money and identity. So uh, and this may be more true for men than women. Some would say, "Oh, that's a stereotype," but I don't think I don't think it is a stereotype. I think evolutionarily, men typically provided. Going back to hunter-gatherer societies, as a digression for a moment, I've been listening to, or not listening, watching a a program on the history of daily life in sort of the very early days of the development of humanity. So we started in the sort of prehistoric times, and now I'm up to ancient Greece. So worked through Mesopotamia and in through Egypt, and now, like I said, I'm at Greece. And one of the things that the history of daily life shows is that although women worked, they typically were not involved in work that related to the sustenance of their families. So rarely were women involved in well, I shouldn't say. Let me rephrase that. Women rarely were women involved in hunting, for example, which was a large source of sustenance for prehistoric peoples. Okay, especially in the days before there was the cultivation of crops. So women may have been involved in the sort of gathering part, berries and that sort of thing, but in the more kind of aggressive and assertive part of providing sustenance, it was men who were involved. As we work our way through into Egypt, for example, so while there were women involved in farming, cultivation, it was still a male dominated part of life at that time. So, to the extent that women did work in addition to keeping a home and bearing and raising children, a lot of the time that was at least for what would be the equivalent of a middle class, was more to afford kind of some of the niceties of life, if you will, as opposed to the subsistence part of life. So I think there's a, like I said, an evolutionary heritage that drives a difference between men and women when it comes to this feature of earning a living and how that impacts our identity. And so when we look at the convergence of money and identity, I think what we see is that to the extent, for example, that a man is not earning or is not supporting his family well, uh, that has a profound impact on how he sees himself, how he values himself, and uh, this can lead to kind of a almost a downward spiral, and it's why it's so important for boys and teenage males, if you will, to be mentored by uh, mature men and guided into productive lives that will support their self-esteem. And in the United States, a productive life in general means a life earning money at whatever the acceptable level is for the particular individual. So again, that's not to say that in order for a man to live a successful life, he has to be earning millions of dollars. That is clearly not the case. On the other hand, I think for most men, the perception of being able to generate sufficient income for a middle class life is a core factor of maintaining proper self esteem, proper self perception. So that's kind of the base, if you will, the foundation on which I think we need to build this. Now, uh, the counterpart is women. So, with the advent of the feminist movement, this idea of earning was sort of imposed on women, and now it's very common for women to take what heretofore was a more male perspective, that their self-worth is tied to what they earn. For women, though, I think this comes into conflict with what is oftentimes a desire to have children, raise children, have a family in that sense, and because it's very difficult to be a good mother while also being, a successful professional, for example. And the stories are legion of women who have gotten into their 40s and and are alone essentially. They never took the time to have children or to build a marriage, and they have a lot of financial success, but they have no family. And I think this is causing a divide in our society that is very unhealthy. And among all the divides in our society, whether they be political, philosophical, etc., the divide between men and women could, I don't want to sound cataclysmic, but to the extent that men and women no longer congregate, so we're going, that really is the end of our society, because it's only through men and women getting together, hopefully marrying and having children, that our society perpetuates itself. So this whole subject of money and wealth in transition, as we look at the psychology undergirding the question, has much broader impact on our society. So, as we consider this question of how do we perceive ourselves in light of our ability or lack thereof to earn money, to build wealth, right? We have something called the wealth whiplash effect. So I see this in my work, where I administrate trusts and estates, and people find themselves all of a sudden getting a big chunk of money, or even a huge chunk of money, that in fact they did nothing to earn. So they're inheriting it in one way or another, and now all of a sudden their economic level has changed, even though nothing else has. And I think that this can create confusion, it can create guilt, but it can also create, it can exacerbate it to the extent that someone already has a sense of entitlement. So now their entitlement belief has been fulfilled, and yet it may not be fulfilled enough, and or okay, now it's been fulfilled, but then they spend their way through that money and it's gone, and yet the sense of entitlement is still there, and so it engenders, a sense of bitterness and resentment, even though the individual did nothing to earn the money, did nothing to make the money. They got it, but then they were irresponsible spending their way through it, and now it's gone. And now they're resentful because their economic status has declines. And so that's why we have this sort of whiplash effect. It's the same thing you see oftentimes with people who win the lottery. So I don't recall the exact statistic, but I believe it's something like 80% of the people who win the lottery spend through all the money in 5 years, or some you know virtually unbelievable statistic like that. Is how could they do that? Someone wins a lottery of, even if it's relatively modest, $10 million, which means they're likely to walk away with somewhere around $5 million if they take a buyout. $5 million is a lot of money, even here in the United States, even here in Los Angeles. One could live for the rest of one's life with family members with $5 million. Okay, it's not going to be a grandiose life, okay, but it would still be reasonably nice life, right? And yet people spend through it, and now they're back where they were, or even worse off, as a result of the experience of having a windfall and then losing it. So when I talk about confusion, I see that sometimes be like, okay, now I have but what do I do about this? Not what do I even do with it? What do I do about this? So I see people who are concerned about the impact unearned wealth will have on their children and their children's expectations, not only while they're children, but later in life. How it could potentially cause conflict between spouses who have a different response or even reaction to the sudden gaining of wealth. And most of us are unprepared for this because most of us don't grow up with a lot of wealth. And so, it really takes a mature, thoughtful approach to working through the confusion to a place of, shall we say, emotional acceptance or comfort, something along those lines, while at the same time not being irresponsible with this newly gained wealth. Going back to another thing I mentioned, guilt. Guilt is, "Well, I didn't do anything to get that. Why do I have this money?" Right? And you see people who will sometimes give away a lot of the money because they feel, "What, I didn't earn it. I'm not entitled to it, and so it needs to go elsewhere." Look, that's a perfectly fine thing to do as long as it comports with what the person's values are, and with what the person truly thinks. So how we work through the whiplash effect, it should be a maturing event. But in any event, we need to be thoughtful. We need to be deliberate in how we work it through, and not let ourselves get carried away by this windfall. So I think that's part of understanding wealth and transition. Another is a sort of a mismatch between financial capability and the emotional ability or the emotional maturity to manage, emerging or newfound, shall we say, ability to generate an income, to create wealth. So I think one of the fortunate parts of my professional history is when I had my first company. It started out very small. It was just me, and I struggled and struggled, and it was over a period of about, let's see, 86. It was over a period of about 5 years. Yeah, it took me about 5 years to really build up to a place where I was earning income at the level that I was seeking, basically a low six-figure income. And I think that was good. If it had come very quickly, I'm that would have been a harder thing to which to adjust. So the fact that I did it incrementally gave me the time to grow in maturity on how to handle the success that I was achieving, right? Um, and I think that part of the reason why I didn't rebuild my business as it started to decline into the early 2000s was that I had a certain image of myself, if you will, and my what I was able to generate financially n- was not on par with that image any longer, and so I sought something else to do with on which I could sort of attach how I viewed myself. So I no longer viewed myself in a purely based on my ability to generate an income and build wealth. And so that was why I joined the Navy as a chaplain, because in the Navy you get paid the same amount based you get paid based on your, as an officer, your rank and your time and grade, and it doesn't matter how great a job or how poor a job you do, you get paid the same amount of money. There is no merit pay in the military, right? So uh, these kinds of uh, issues can have a profound impact on us, and they take, I think, a fair degree of self knowledge for us to navigate successfully. And most of us, I certainly did not have that self knowledge. I had to gain it as I built my business. So, this is where financial mentorship and kind of a pacing lifestyle, so that, in my case, I could get used to the changes in my financial status. I could accustom myself to them, and not make, egregious mistakes, or develop spending habits that were unsustainable, and that sort of thing. So, if we want to avoid the whiplash effect, then I think we need to get good financial mentorship, so that even if our gains come very rapidly, or if the declines come very rapidly, we have someone to whom we can look for advice and guidance on how to deal with those, because they can have a very similar impact, and we have to be able to develop ourselves to withstand both. Okay, uh, let's talk about now. Let's talk about when income lags ambition. And I know this was one of my frustrations. The first time I was in business is, I've mentioned this before, I believe. Uh, I was working for someone. He was a real estate syndicator, and the second year I worked for him, he earned $500,000. And not to say that he didn't work hard, he certainly did. But I was also working extremely hard, 60 to 80, sometimes as much as 100 hours a week. And in this year that he earned $500,000, I got paid $15,000. Okay. And I thought, that was way out of scale, number one, for the effort that I had made. And number two, given how hard I had worked and what I thought I had contributed to the success of the firm, it what I earned was in no way aligned with my ambition. And that is what impelled me to quit and start my own firm, where I was the arbiter, if you will, of how much I was going to earn relative to the work that I put in. And I believe to this day that having one's own business is the best thing to have, or being a part of a business, in essence a part owner of a business, whether it's by having stock options, or owning even a small amount of equity in a company, for which you're working. This is the best way to deal with this issue of income lagging behind ambition, because if I am a part or a full owner of a company, if my income is lagging behind what I think I should be making, well, in the end, the responsibility is mine, because I'm an owner or a co-owner of the venture. And so if I'm not earning enough, then I have to take responsibility for that, and I have to figure out what changes do I need to make in order for my income to match, or even exceed my ambition. And so, again, this is, I think, a mindset into which we need to mature. We do live in a very entitled, focused society. We hear it in advertisements all the time. You deserve this. You deserve that. Your rights. You're this. You're that. I will say that I think all of that type of advertising is incredibly corrosive for our society. Most of us don't deserve much of anything that we're not, for which we're not willing to work. That is the bottom line. Okay, and the fact of the matter is, even in societies that are highly socialistic, where the government in essence provides whatever it is, housing, food, pensions, or whatever. The government is only able to do that on the backs of the productive people in the society. And so, to the extent that someone is taking more from the society than he's contributing, that is creating, first of all, obviously an imbalance, but it's also creating resentments. And, one would hope at least some guilt on the part of the taker that he is taking more than that to which he's entitled. So, as we look at how do we put ourselves in a position where our level of maturity is staying essentially aligned with our financial level. Okay, so being a part being a part owner of an enterprise is one of the best ways to do that. Now, if for whatever reason, we're not a part owner of a business, or maybe we've been working for a company for a number of years, we're loath to give that up, the seniority up or whatever, even though the chances we're going to ever get equity or stock options or whatever are not going to materialize. So then we think we have a little bit harder time of it. Or let's say, you're in the military, where the military is not a wealth building institution per se, although the pension system in the military does provide an incentive to stick in, to stay in for 20 years in order to get a pension. And these days, if a service member stays in the military and does get a pension, it's likely that they're going to retire from the military with an equivalent net worth based on their pension payments of probably somewhere between at least $500,000 and $1 million. I've done the calculations many times, and for someone who retires from the military as at least an E6. So in the Navy, that's a first class petty officer. In the Army, that would be a staff sergeant. And that would also be the case for the Marine Corps, I believe. And I can never remember the enlisted ranks in the Air Force. But so if you're retiring at the E6 level, and this is going back when I did the calculations now about close to 20 years, you were going to retire with the equivalent net worth of at least $500,000. So today, maybe it's more like $700,000 or $800,000. And if you're an officer in the military, you retire as an officer, even if it's as an O3, certainly as an O4, the pension that you're going to get is likely to be the equivalent of a net worth of around $1 million. Okay, and then the more senior you are, the higher the value, what's called the net present value of your pension. So all of these are ways of looking at, really, is your income as an employee, is it really lagging behind your ambition? Or are you building wealth in ways that you're not perceiving because you can't actually see it in your bank account? But indeed, your financial position 10, 15, 20 plus years hence is actually going to satisfy your ambition. And so the ability to look beyond just the simple numbers to see what it is you're truly doing in a professional or work situation will help deal with that issue of income potentially lagging behind ambition. Okay, so let's take a break, and I'll come back with some more thoughts. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So, this is People Making Money, one of the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're talking about wealth in transition. And this is sort of the nexus between our financial situation and our self identity. So, I talked about a few things uh, to start out: the psychology of money and identity, the wealth whiplash effect, and what happens when income lags behind ambition. So, next, I want to talk about. Well, I want just going to mention this because I did a whole show several weeks ago on lifestyle creep, and this is the situation where, as you earn more money and build greater wealth, your the cost of your lifestyle is outstripping even the gains that you're making. So I'll do my best to remember to put a link to that episode in the show notes for this episode if you want to refer back and take a look at this issue of lifestyle creep. Okay, so I think the next issue about wealth and transition is what happens to our relationships when financial changes are taking place. So, as we, for example, earn more money, achieve greater professional or work success, how will our current friends respond to that? How will our spouse respond to it? Our children? Okay, so this is different than what happens if we get a windfall or some kind of inheritance, or win the lottery. Okay, that's a little bit different because while a person ends up wealthier as a result, most people look at that and go, okay, but they didn't do anything to get that, and so I guess good for them that they have the money, but they're still the person I knew before, or nothing changed about them that got them that money, as opposed to someone who, through their work efforts, starts to build a larger, more successful financial position. So it can often create a situation where friends or even family members look at it and say, I work just as hard as Kevin. How come he's successful and I'm not? So it can breed jealousy. It can breed resentment. Um, now that's in terms of friendships or even sometimes family members, but it can also happen in business partnerships. Maybe but in there it's a little bit altered because presumably all the partners are working for the benefit of the business, but one partner may be the so-called rainmaker, who's bringing in all the income generation, while other partners may be more maybe focused on operations or logistics or whatever. And so for the partner who's bringing in the income, so to speak, it could cause him to think, well, I'm actually the one bringing in all the money. How come I'm only getting a third of the results? I should be entitled to more of the results, because without me, uh, the business would not be successful. But of course, that's a false argument, because it's all good and well to bring in the business, but then somebody has to service the business, and if the business isn't serviced, it's going to pretty quickly fall apart, right? But that reality doesn't necessarily, or the objective truth of that reality doesn't necessarily cause people to give up their jealousies or their resentments or whatever. And so we have to look I think we have to be aware of how changes in our financial status is impacting other people. So I know again, going back to when I had my first company and I started doing well, there was a time, I probably about about 6 years into when I started my company, I was earning more than all of my immediate family combined. Right? Sounds pretty crazy, and it was crazy. I mean, it was my ambition to be financially successful, but what ended up happening was one by one, my family members came to work for me, and they see, wait, why is Kevin earning all this money in essence? And it wasn't, fortunately, it wasn't a big a big source of dissension among my family members, but there was tension there that me, a child, was employing both my parents, and me, not the oldest child, was employing both my sisters, right, one older and one younger. So these are, generally speaking, we don't think that this is how life is supposed to work. And so I was looking at it from the standpoint, as I thought it was a terrific thing to be able to provide my family members with employment. And I liked working with my mother. I had worked with her before, when we both worked for someone else. I liked working with my dad because he came out of retirement, and he was doing work he loved to do. I've told stories about my dad and I working together before. And my sisters, it was kind of like, well, I felt like I had an obligation, since they needed a place to work, to give them a place to work. But they were looking at, and I didn't realize that my sisters primarily were looking at it differently. My dad and I think my dad and I were looking at it exactly the same. That's why it worked out very well. And to a large extent, I think the same was true with my mom. But these are dynamics about which we have to be aware, and we have to take some responsibility if we want to maintain those relationships. Okay, so I'm reminded of an episode of the TV show Friends, when let's see, it's um, Chandler and I'm trying to think. It was Chandler and Ross, and I'm trying to think of who the third one was. Oh, and Monica. They were all doing well financially, and so they wanted to go see a Hootie and the Blowfish concert. And the other three friends, Rachel and Joey and Phoebe, they were not doing well, and so they couldn't afford to go. And they felt like the other three friends were putting them down, by being saying, well, we should go to this, and they can't afford to go. And it was a great episode because they found the way to work through it, which is the point, right? So at one point, the three friends who can afford it say, well, why don't we pay for you to go? And then the other three friends are like, no, that's not the point. We don't want to have to feel bad about not being able to afford to go, and you are making us feel bad. That was kind of the statement. And the three friends who could afford to go were saying, wait a minute, why should we feel guilty for having done well enough to be able to afford to go to this cool concert, right? And the fact of the matter is, in the way they handled it, they hurt their friends' feelings. The three who could afford to go hurt their friends' feelings. They could have handled it differently, right? But it was also not true, on the part of the three friends who couldn't afford to go, that they were being made to feel that way, right? They had a choice about how they felt. And if their friends had hurt their feelings, the proper response was to say, I don't think you intend to do it this way, but the way this is all coming together makes me feel bad. I have to take responsibility for feeling bad, but you need to take responsibility for being, a more sensitive friend, in essence, right? And that's the reason I bring up this episode, is because First of all, it's a brilliant TV show about how to maintain relationships, right? Because the whole show is about how these six people maintained their close friendships, close relationships, and then eventually, well, Chandler and Monica get married, right? Maintain their marriage in the face of all the kinds of things that happen in life that can make friendships and marriages come apart, right? And so there's actually, I think, a lot of good sort of grist for the mill, as we say, in watching that show and getting some thoughts about how to better manage, uh, relationship conflict, and in this particular episode, the conflict that comes out of financial changes, financial disparities, that sort of thing. So there's no reason for us to be resentful or jealous of people who do better than we do. Look, sometimes it is luck. Okay, so we didn't get lucky and they did. All right. Sometimes the fact of the matter is other people work harder than we do. I'm perfectly willing to stipulate that a lot, if not most, of the people who are more financially successful than I am are just they're willing to work harder, make bigger sacrifices than I've been willing to make. Well, that's fine. That's their values, and they should live and be well. But there's no basis for me to be jealous of their success, and even if they got luckier than I do, because and I've talked about this book before, The Richest Man in Babylon. In a way, we sort of tempt the goddess of good luck, so to speak. And so, if God has chosen to give a particular individual greater blessing than I've received, well, so that is telling me something about my relationship with God, and that's information, that's input for me to ponder and consider, maybe I need to do something differently, or maybe there's a reason why God does not want me to be as financially successful as other people. Maybe he realizes it's not the right thing for me at that particular time, or I haven't developed the kind of maturity that would allow me to handle it, or it's just not what he wants me to have. Okay, that may be it. And so all of these are ways of approaching how changes in financial situation can impact our relationships. And just like with so many of these issues, I think we need to be deliberate in examining them. We need to be mature in examining them. And I think we need to be truthful to ourselves, and we need to be uh, um, kind and nice, which are not the same thing, in dealing with our friends and family members when it comes to these issues. And look, the fact of the matter may be that as we progress professionally and economically, there may be some people who we're going to not be able to maintain, with whom we're not going to be able to maintain relationships. Okay? Because relationships always take at least two people, right? And to the extent that a person cannot reconcile himself to our financial gains, or for that matter, our financial losses, okay? It can be a situation where we were involved with people who were generally wealthier, and now for whatever reason our financial situation has declined, and now the wealthier people with whom we were friends with or whatever before, they may not be comfortable being around someone who's not as wealthy as they are. They don't want to have to deal with someone who can't pick up the check or go on the expensive vacation or whatever. Okay, well, I mean, if that, that's telling you something about those people. I think that they're unwilling to make the emotional investment in maintaining a friendship despite what what became a financial disparity. Okay, well, I mean, some people just can't. So we have to deal with that on our own, but we might have to leave those relationships behind. And again, it takes maturity, it takes the desire to have insight into these issues, it takes being honest with ourselves, and in the end, it takes being willing to be, like I said, kind and nice in talking about these issues with other people. Kind in the sense of being honest and candid, but nice in the sense of not clubbing them over the head with our candor, with our honesty. Okay, next, the I'm gonna skip this one actually because we're coming up on time here. So okay, so financial planning for identity growth, I think, we don't have to wait until the changes are occurring for us to start planning how we're going to deal with those changes. Okay, so for example, and this was the case in my life, I did start out as an employee, but pretty quickly I saw that the path for financial success for me really had to go through being a business owner or an entrepreneur. I wasn't an entrepreneur in the purest sense of that world, in sort of creating a new business. The business I was in, the real estate business, which has existed for millennia, certainly centuries. But I was entrepreneurial in my business, in that I was a pretty early adopter of technology and those kind of things for making my business operate as efficiently as possible. So I set goals all along the way, both short, medium, and long-term goals, many of which I didn't initially achieve, and I had to revise those goals. And I've learned over the decades, really, how best to effectively use goal setting for myself. And in fact, I don't do a whole lot of goal setting per se anymore. I actually have created what I call conditions of satisfaction. Actually, I got that idea from my friend Jeffrey Hazlett, a very perceptive entrepreneur and businessman. And so while I have annual objectives that I'm seeking to meet in support of achieving or maintaining my conditions of satisfaction, that's what I do now. But it took me several decades to get that all figured out. That was all part of my personal, professional, and financial maturation. Okay, and so I think it's an excellent idea to set goals no matter where you're at in your life. You may be my age and you've never set a goal in your life, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever set them. Quite to the contrary, start setting them now. Okay, and I'm 65, but you could even at my age you could set 20 or 30-year goals. It's becoming ever more common for people to live into their 80s and 90s. My mother turned, I shouldn't say how old my mother is. Maybe I've mentioned it before, but anyway, let's just say that, good for her that she, continues to get older, but maintains herself in good health. She recently had successful shoulder surgery, and she's able to drive a car again. She's very excited about that, right? So we need to be planning, thinking ahead, pondering how might we deal with these issues, okay? Knowing that the future is probably never going to occur exactly how we think it will, but this is the value of planning. So planning, maybe it's been Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower said this: planning is crucial, plans are worthless, right? So to go through the process of planning is a very good thing because it gets us thinking about alternatives. It gets thinking about what problems may arise that can prevent our achieving whatever goals, objections, or conditions of satisfaction that we set. So the planning process gets our minds thinking, uh, gets us considering what alternatives might we be able to turn to if our current path is not getting us where we want to go. Plans, on the other hand, to the extent that they cause our behavior to calcify, so we're not able to make the changes and be nimble in our approach to uh, achieving our goals or conditions of satisfaction. So those plans are in some cases worse than worthless. They are an absolute negative drag on us. Okay, so and balancing those can be a little bit difficult. So we want to be planning, but we do have to create plans. We just can't let the plans become something that holds us back. We have to be sometimes we have to be as nimble in changing our plans as we are in being desirous of having a plan to which that we are following. So I think all of this comes down to a few things. One is we have to be willing to engage in uh, taking our dreams, if you will, and turning them into a realistic way that they might be achieved. We have to be willing to share those ideas with mentors, with our spouse, with other close friends in our lives, with maybe a business partner. Okay. And we have to be somewhat fearless in doing so because sometimes people will denigrate us for having ambition, especially if that ambition would necessitate our rising above whatever station we happen to have in life at that time. And our friends may look at that and say, "Oh, well, you're going to become better than we are." And who do you think you are, kind of thing, that kind of attitude. Well, that's why it takes some courage, and it's one of the reasons why I always sign off by saying courage at all times, because we have to be courageous in how we approach our lives. We have to be courageous in in seeking to attain our goals, in seeking to make our dreams come true. And I don't mean this in the sort of fanciful way of of a child. I mean in the considered way of a mature adult. I think it's the saddest thing I can think of is to hear when an adult says, "Oh, I long ago gave up all my dreams." Wow, that is truly terrible. We should all have dreams. We should all have a sense of the quality of life that we want to have, not just for ourselves, of course, ourselves, our loved ones, our families, our friends, our communities, our community, our nation, the world. Okay, it's fine to have these dreams. It's desirable. It's necessary, even and because they inspire us. Where would we be, especially as Americans, were it not for men and women who dreamed of a country that could become what the United States has become, despite all her faults? Whether it's engaging, like I say, friends, family, business associates, professionals, financial planners, career planners, all of these people can help us create a plan, financial and otherwise, that can also facilitate the growth in our identity. And in the end, that's what this is really about. Okay, as much as people making money is about how to achieve professional work success and build wealth, in the end, it's about understanding who we are. And so I want to wrap up on this. So I think that we tend to think in the United States, especially, we tend to think of wealth as being monetary or solely monetary, and that is not the case. So we need to think of wealth as not only money, but also health in all areas: physical, mental, spiritual, in relationships, in perhaps, and in our whatever else we value. We may value autonomy. So, to be wealthy, then we need to have a wealth of autonomy. We may value wealth in not being autonomous, in in creating a network of reliances. Okay, that would be. I know from my life, I find myself in the tension between desiring autonomy and recognizing that my life is much better when I have more reliances, right? And so wealth for me is when I'm feeling like I'm kind of in the sweet spot of balancing those two, which frankly rarely happens. But wealth is rarely a permanent condition in any case. So there have been times in my life when I've had a lot more money in the bank than other times. There have been times in my life when I've had far more friends than I've had at other times. There have been times in my life when I've been much healthier than other times. So, roughly a year and a half ago, I was, in the hospital. And 6 months before that, if you go back and watch those episodes, I've got one eye blocked out because of a physical condition. So I was not particularly wealthy in terms of physical health from starting kind of early 2023 through roughly the middle of last year. Okay, and so now I'm blessed to have a wealth of physical health that, for whatever reason, I just wasn't able to achieve, in that prior time period. So I encourage you, when I talked about planning just a moment ago, when I talk about planning for wealth, plan for wealth broadly defined. And in the end, that's what the three pillars of attainment are all about. It's how to create a wealthy life in all the nine realms of life. Within all three pillars, each pillar has three realms. So within all of those, striving for that transition to wealth, a wealth of relationships, a robust relationship with God, a, um, a an inspiring identity, an abundance mindset, as they say, a wealth of good health, a lot of pursuits, financial wealth, a wonderful thing, but also lots of hobbies or avocations that we enjoy, that give us as much enjoyment as our professional accomplishments. Um, uh, not academics, not the word I'm trying to think of. Intellectual, a wealth of intellectual pursuits that also stimulate us and help feed us with what we need in order to gain ever greater levels of wealth in all these other realms. So that is the message of the transition to wealth. Again, we think about it as being monetary, and certainly monetary wealth is a fine thing for which to strive. But I'll put on my rabbi hat here for a minute. My blessing for you is that you will seek and find wealth broadly in your life in all these various realms. So I thank you so much for joining me today. And this is a kind of episode where I would particularly love to hear your thoughts, comments, criticisms. How did this strike you? Did it inspire you, and if so, how? Did it depress you, and if so, how? Okay, so all my social media links will be in the show notes after this episode posts on Facebook. I'm sorry, after this episode posts on YouTube. Um, and you can go there. You can rewatch it if you choose to. Maybe there's somebody in your life that needs this message, and if so, I would deeply appreciate it if you would show them this episode, and maybe it'll give them some comfort. It'll reignite some excitement in their lives, and I would love to have the chance to earn their subscribership. So I thank you again very much for joining me today and look forward to hopefully seeing you again next week. Thanks so much to my live viewers. Great to have you there. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell. And here it comes, courage at all times.